Welcome to Plug and Play, the podcast of Payzar that brings payroll professionals from all over the world together. And this is not just a podcast, this is the season finale. And as you might have noticed by now, I will be the guest host and Marc-Oliver will be the guest to his own show. So finally, we'll get to know the person who's behind Payzar and behind the podcast. And just for the listeners, Marc-Oliver has not been prepped for any questions, so everything will be a surprise, and we hope for a very genuine answer. So, Marc-Oliver, are you ready to kick it off?
I'm not sure, but let's get into it. This is going to be fun and exciting for sure. And I couldn't, by the way, have hoped for a better interviewer than Max yourself. So.
That's very kind of you, but tell me afterwards how you found it. But okay, so Marc-Oliver, we got to know you as the owner, co-founder, the brains behind Payzar, but we don't really know you yet. So tell us a little bit about Marc-Oliver. Who is Marc-Oliver Fiedler?
Ooh, where do I start? Well, I'll give you a bit of, I guess, my sort of my life background. So I'm originally German by birth and upbringing. But I've lived abroad for the by now majority of my life. The last 20 plus years I spent living outside Germany in various different countries. Moved to the US to study there, and then I ended up working in Silicon Valley. Ultimately came back to work for a small company called ADP in France, and spent 5 years there, and then when I started Payzar, it's almost exactly 5 years ago, I ended up moving to Barcelona. Even though we're an Irish company, the weather and climate. I'm married to a Turkish woman, and pretty quickly the family decision was we're not going to move to Dublin. We'll move to Barcelona. So that's how we ended up here. Love the Spanish environment. We have one son who's 7 years old, goes to school here, and we just adopted a dog who's been featured on some of the episodes as well. She's actually sleeping down here at my feet right now, Mochi. So
she knows everything about payroll.
She's learning very quickly. Yes. We have her on some of these sort of, externally facing interactions. So we'll prep her to become a sales rep, I think.
Maybe one day. So let me just step in. You mentioned you, of course, founded Payzar. Was it 5-6 years ago? So can you just take us back to the moment where you had that first epiphany and thought, this is what I need to do. This is what the payroll industry needs. Can you take us back to that moment?
Yeah, I'm not sure it was like one sort of, the light bulb went off, but I think it sort of grew over time, where I started to realize, both on a personal level, that I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. I'd always worked in very large corporate environments. I worked at companies like Hewlett-Packard and Oracle, and then at ADP. So all companies that had tens of thousands of employees. Now it's fortunate in those environments to always work on kind of next generation solutions and topics, launching sort of new ventures within that corporate environment, and definitely felt I wanted to do something more entrepreneurial. And I guess that sort of desire to do something more, that I own and that I shape by myself and with my team, and then the realization that in the global payroll space, it's a very challenging environment, as you know, for anyone running global payroll, and seeing how traditional vendors, like the company that I worked for at the time, ADP, but others also, were looking to help and solve that global payroll challenge. It kind of felt to me that, while the model had the right intentions to simplify and streamline and centralize global payroll operations, I could see that it came with a lot of, and still comes with a lot of, pains for the customer in a way. It's, the traditional model is very disruptive. In order to adopt a global payroll solution, a traditional global aggregator solution, you have to basically rip out all your existing local payrolls. You have to replace your local payroll vendors and solutions. It's also quite restrictive in the way that it only supports you if you're willing and able to outsource all your payrolls. A lot of companies want to manage part of their payroll footprint internally, and then other parts where they maybe don't have the skill and expertise.
Hybrid is the one size fits all, right?
Yeah, and that traditional model really doesn't allow you to have this sort of hybrid and mix match of different deployment or different delivery models. It's kind of like you said, it's one size fits all. You got to either take it all or nothing. And so with that realization that the traditional solutions were quite restrictive in many ways and disruptive for the customer to adopt these solutions, rolling that out, if you're a company that has 20, 30 different countries, it will take you 2 years, 3 years easily to just deploy the new solution across all your different countries. Myself and a few of my co-conspirators at ADP, we kind of sat together and we brainstormed. We said there should be a better way to solve this conundrum that global payroll professionals are facing. And that ultimately led to the idea of Payzar, which is an open platform where you don't have to rip out everything that you've built up, in many cases over many years, and carefully put in place. So with our open plug and play model, you can keep working with and leverage the solutions and partners that you've built up over time, but we will help you to standardize and aggregate and automate your global payroll environment by use of the Payzar platform. And so that was sort of the epiphany that, hey, that should be possible. And then we set out like any good startup. We built our first pilot of the platform, launched that with a few clients, and then from there sort of started to get rolling.
I see the smile on your face, so it still brings you a lot of joy being an entrepreneur and actually disrupting payroll.
It's super exciting. I'll tell you, you've worked in the payroll space for a long time, longer than I've been in this space, and you know that payroll is very complex. It's very multidimensional, right? I think people looking at payroll from the outside, and I'll call myself out as well. When I got recruited by ADP, the role was great, and I thought, hey, this is gonna be interesting. But when I told my friends I'm gonna work in the payroll industry, a lot of them looked at me and said, really, why would you do that to yourself? That doesn't sound like it's sort of a super exciting thing. But once you start to peel back the onion a bit and you start seeing what really is going on, I think there's so many fascinating dimensions to the payroll environment, from the process challenges to how can you apply technology in places where it makes sense. You've got compliance, you've got adjacent functions that need to be somehow incorporated into what we're trying to do in the payroll space, HR and finance and benefits and others. So for me, it is a very fascinating world to live in and work in. And yeah, working in this space as the CEO of a startup is it's a rocket ride with its ups and downs. It's like the experience is completely different from working in a big corporate environment where you also have your highs and your lows, but the highs are not as high and the lows are not as low. I always compare it working in a startup like this. I compare it to I'm I grew up at the Baltic, and I learned sailing when I was young, and it feels a lot more, running a startup like this feels a lot more like, sailing a little dinghy where you feel every bump, and when the wind blows hard, you think, whoa, I'm going to capsize, versus, being on a big cruise ship where...
That's a great analogy. Maybe one day Payzar will be that cruise ship, but still be agile enough to move with trends in global payroll. Hey, I just plugged my next question. I'm getting the hang of this host thing. So let's talk.
Don't get too good at it, otherwise my team is going to hire you for the whole next season. We got to be careful of not getting me unemployed here.
Who knows? But you might be a perfect guest too. Okay, enough of the cuddling. So let's talk about global payroll, because you've been in the industry also for a long time, and I can only imagine through plug and play or talking to clients and to other partners, you've accumulated a lot of knowledge and experience and probably your own set of ideas around global payroll. So I just want to touch base on some trends, some service improvements you might see, of course, technology, which is true to your heart, and something around people as well, because you've met a lot of payroll people. So let's first talk about some trends. This is always difficult to single out a few trends, but if you would look in your glass ball, you would say, yes, these would be the 3 key trends that would start shaping global payroll within the next year or so. Which 3 would you single out, and why?
Which ones would I single out? It's really it is challenging because there's so much going on, and I could mention a bunch of different things. I guess I would start by saying I think it's fair to characterize the payroll space still as a fairly manual, kind of, low tech, people dependent. It's exactly. It's kind of an industry of spreadsheets and emails in a lot of organizations, right? There are exceptions, but I think it's still fair to say that in a lot of cases, technology that we're used to, working with in other parts of our lives or in other parts of the organization, really hasn't quite infiltrated into the payroll space, and there's many reasons for that as well. Some good reasons, some not so good reasons, but it is what it is. So I would say, one of the trends that definitely has been shaping the industry and continues to shape the industry is just more process automation and data integration, because those tend to be some of the most challenging things, right? It's a super data rich environment that payroll professionals work in.
If I can tap into that, Marc-Oliver, because I think if I would have asked you this question 5 years ago, you might have also said more process automation, more digitization, more looking at data. So what do you think that needs to happen for us to have answered this question in a few years' time, so it would not be a topic anymore?
Yeah, that's even tougher to say. Why can't we fast forward, right, and progress through this? You're right. It's not like this just people realized yesterday that there's still a lot of manual intervention required. I think what makes it challenging to overcome this, as quickly as maybe we all would like, is a couple things. I think, let's face it, most organizations, payroll is not considered to be I wouldn't say a strategic function. I do think people recognize more these days than ever that payroll is very strategic, especially through the pandemic. Man, if you didn't have your payroll operations under control, you could really hit some rocky bits along the road. But it's not a revenue generating function, right? It's a back office function, and getting investment priority from your senior leadership team, I think, has always been a challenge in payroll, right? There's obviously many other projects that are constantly vying for resources, investment dollars, and for payroll sort of to be recognized that this is where we should put our money. It's not easy, right? And I would go back to part of why it's not easy is because as we talked about earlier, traditional solutions require you to make this sort of all or nothing change, right? You couldn't just say, this part of my operating environment isn't working so well, so let me just kind of fine-tune this piece. Maybe it's your reporting, right? Maybe it's your data integration with your HR and your payroll environment. Maybe it's how I get my data from payroll into finance. It didn't offer the ability to sort of do precision surgery on your payroll. You basically had to chop off the whole body and do sort of a big transplant and then hope that the patient would do well coming out of the surgery.
Yeah, I think that's a good analogy, because aside from what you say, the budgetary aspects, probably also, is it not that we should reflect people in my role, global payroll manager, international payroll managers, directors, who might fear that chopping that up might end up us being in a cemetery? So is it maybe that people in my roles are accepting the status quo too much and have too big of a fear to really adopt disruptive change and just try to do bits and pieces? So it's also reflecting on ourselves. Do you observe that in conversation with prospects, clients as well?
I would say, obviously it depends. There's, people that you meet that are a lot more forward thinking and, aggressive in their, mindset on how they want to tackle the status quo. But I think it is fair to say that payroll, look, in payroll, you get measured by by not making mistakes, right? So if you make a mistake, that's when everyone starts to look at payroll and says, what's going on over here? As long as you don't make mistakes, people are happy and people are not pointing fingers.
The sound of silence is what we're looking for. Yeah.
A little bit, right? So as long as you're not getting phone calls, that's kind of a good situation if you're working in a payroll profession. If your phones start to light up, it's usually not because someone says, wow, you've done such a great job, Max. It's usually because someone has an issue, right, and wants answers from you. And so I think there's a certain degree of just risk aversity built into payroll, right? Because we need to get it right 100% of the time, and we can't get it just sort of right. And so that obviously makes any change a bit scary, right? As long as it's been working and the house is not on fire, why change it? And I think combine that with what I've detected in many payroll professionals as this incredible resistance, persistence to have problems thrown at them from all sides. It's the management, it's the regulators, it's the vendor, and they figure it out always. I was talking to someone yesterday that was telling me vendor changed the whole software. They couldn't get gross to net files anymore. They had to do everything manually, and guess what? They did it. And that's just, payroll professionals are very resilient. And sometimes probably too much resilient to say, well, maybe there's a better mousetrap. Let me try something else.
Would you not maybe say, Marc-Oliver, that aside from companies like Payzar and others out there who typically focus on technology and how they can improve, should maybe also shift their focus in taking away that implementation and rip and replace fear that might be underlying with buyers or with people who do see the change but have a fear for implementation? So should that not be a bigger focus of the Payzars of this world?
Yeah, look, I think we are trying to make that point about, as I said before, traditional solutions require you to make this big wholesale change, right? And that's very disruptive. Involves a lot of risk, right? The moment you start touching all your different local payrolls, as we know, it's a bit like open heart surgery. Anything could go wrong by moving, your current payroll operations to a new vendor. And so that is quite scary. And with our open, flexible model, you don't have to go through that disruption. So it is less risk. We actually call it change with no change, right? We're trying to help customers. I'm not sure that's the best way to capture it, right? But maybe it's change without the risk or something like that, right? It's basically improving your payroll operations, bringing in more visibility, better controls, better automation, helping you to advance your current payroll operations without all that implementation risk that you mentioned, because you're basically keeping everything that works, right? Your local vendors, the local payroll software, you keep that in place, and you just put something on top that helps to, lift everything up from where it has been to, a higher standard.
Yeah, now, in conversations with you and hearing you, the local vendors who still run local payrolls still play a pivotal role in your model or in each other model. How do you see the role of local vendors compared to, I will probably use the wrong term, consolidators or open platforms like yourselves? How do you see their role in this whole disruptive change?
Oh, I mean, for us, look, they're a super integral part of the overall solution proposition, right? And I think it's important to point out that as Payzar, we don't operate payroll, we don't run or process payroll in any country, and that's by design. Obviously, we could decide to hire payroll professionals to run payroll in, Ireland or in Spain, where we have, physical presence. But we don't, because we think that there's many, many good vendors out there, local payroll professionals out there. The world doesn't need another local payroll vendor. There's ample choice for any kind of, local payroll support that you need. Whether you need someone who can handle large scales, whether you need someone who maybe can help you with more specific small local teams, maybe offer more than just payroll services. There's so many different local payroll providers out there that you can work with. For us, it's more a matter of how do we help customers to, number one, be able to work with the local payroll partner that really fits their specific needs, which is not always the one with the biggest brand or the sort of most recognized logo out there. Sometimes it's the little guys that boutique vendors, that people haven't heard about, and we actually see it as part of our contribution to the payroll community and to the industry to empower these small boutique vendors to be able to serve large multinational clients like Zoom, right? Where a small boutique vendor otherwise might never get the chance and visibility to even end up on the radar. But now, by being plugged into the Payzar network and operating model, they do have the ability to show their skills and show their know-how and deliver great service to the customer. So for us, working with the local, the ICPs as they're called, is a very synergetic relationship. And in fact, I will tell you that we have a growing number of ICPs that not only work with us around a specific customer that we're working with as Payzar, where someone has approached Payzar and said, I'd like to work with Payzar and have you help me harmonize and centralize my payroll environment. We have a growing number of ICPs that look to use our platform, or are using, not just look to use, they are using our platform with their own local customers. Why? Why? Because they white label it. And I think why that is a relationship that works is because a lot of the local vendors are extremely knowledgeable about the payroll, the payroll processing and the compliance and regulatory aspects. They have great, knowledge in the local country. Typically, especially in smaller organizations, they have less resources to build great technology. Even their payroll calculation engine that they're using is probably sourced from a third party where they have very little control over, enhancement and so on. So where we can be a good complement for these local payroll vendors is we have a flexible technology platform. It's very modern, it's very easy to work with. It helps to give the vendor and their customer better customer experience, right? Because everything's sort of online, visually laid out. So, so we do see that sort of benefit that we're able to deliver not just to the end customer, but also to the local payroll partners.
I do have to give you kudos that every question gets translated in sort of a sales pitch for Payzar. So I think that still shows the fire you have and the belief you have in your offering, which is nice to see. I applaud you for it, Marc-Oliver.
And I don't want to turn this into like a big sales presentation, but you did ask about how the open providers and how we view and how we interoperate with the ICPs, and that's, I'm just telling you our experience, right? This is kind of how we see ourselves working with the vendor landscape out there.
I understand. I applaud you for the fire you still have for your product. It's good. It gives insights. So if we switch gears a little bit to technology, and I really want to try to make this as practical as possible, because we've heard over the last few years developments in machine learning, ML. We've heard robotic process automation, RPA. We heard natural language processing, artificial intelligence. Now, that's probably all awesome, but it goes beyond my tech mind, and I can probably say beyond most professionals, payroll professionals' tech mind. So a day in the life of a payroll professional, Marc-Oliver, what would you see the technology development, which could be from Payzar or in general, that would truly help the payroll professional in his daily life working in international payroll?
Yeah. Look, I know you and I have talked a bit about what are some of the major pain points that you find in most payroll operations, and I think it goes back to you need to make sure that you've got solid inputs into your payroll process. If you can't ensure that, then everything that sort of happens downstream risks of being, not correct and not, accurate with what you're ultimately supposed to deliver, right? So, and we see a lot of organizations that struggle with getting just what we call the data preparation part of the kind of end-to-end payroll process, getting that sorted out, getting that fully under control. And it's hard, right? Because in payroll, we have to work with so many different, input sources. A lot of times when we talk to clients, they say, our biggest challenge is we want to have Workday or SAP connected to our payroll. And yep, that's a good step forward, right? If you're able to do that. But then the reality is that typically it's not just Workday or SAP, it's many other adjacent systems. Sometimes it's, the information that you need to be able to tap and bring into your payroll environment can be on someone's spreadsheet, right? On someone's desktop in a spreadsheet. So, but I think that's one of the big challenges that we see with lots of clients is just how do we get better at managing the data preparation, the data input, and then related to that, because that's hard, because there's still a lot of manual wrangling that goes on, you then also have the challenge of validating. Once you've prepared your data, you send it over to whoever's processing the payroll, whether it's in-house or externally, you're not done by just getting your gross to net file back and saying, okay, thank you very much, press the button and pay people. Typically you have to do a lot of checking, right, before you reassure yourself that everything is good to go and you're ready to actually issue the payments.
And if you would link that, Marc-Oliver, to technology developments, right? That first speed, that pre-payroll, I think we've both agreed that it takes about 60% of the life of a payroll professional to do number crunching in pre-payroll.
Right.
And with all that fancy technology, AI, ML, RPA, how do you think we can use that type of technology to make that pre-payroll a lot smoother and a lot less manual?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple things. One is, there's a lot of talk about that in the industry, as well as more, direct data feeds and integration out of whatever the source is, whether it's a packaged software solution like an SAP or Workday, or it's someone's spreadsheet. As much as you can avoid having to refactor that information, right? Cut and slice it, repackage it so that it now fits into your payroll environment. If you can automate that piece through, data integration, data mappings, where you can tell your system that, hey, the data that you need to pick up from, Workday that contains your bonus information will always be here and looks like this, and it's in this format, and you need to, by the way, translate it because it comes in whatever, US dollars, and we need to translate it here into our local currency. As much as you can automate that part without having someone to, manually mess around with that, I think that takes a lot of potential errors out of the equation. Because let's face it, payroll professionals are human beings. They're constantly under the gun. Totally, I haven't met a payroll robot yet. But more importantly, they're human. They have superhuman qualities,
but we're not without flaw.
Not with and to its limits, right? So by the time that you're up against your deadline and you've worked the last 3 nights until midnight to get the darn payroll processed, at some point you're going to slip up and miss something or forget about something, right? And that's where whatever you want to call it, machine learning or process automation, machines don't get tired. They can also make mistakes if you don't tell them properly what to do in certain scenarios. But that's something that is fixable. But once you've properly trained them, they will do whatever you want them to do, right? And I think in many ways payroll is also, this part of payroll is quite repetitive, right? Every month we do the same thing, right? Every month you prepare the same set of input data, you do the same sort of validation. So anything that's that repetitive lends itself to a machine being able to do that with the right sort of, training and configuration, being able to do that better than a human being.
But Marc-Oliver, would it not be nice that although you can train them in certain structures, I think many peers of mine also know that once you got it figured out and structured, a vendor or a benefits vendor or an HCM provider changes their fields or their data model. It used to be in column A, now it's in column B. So you would have to replicate it there. Would it not be nice if we would really have a sort of AI where you could say, just throw everything at us? We will find the appropriate data that we need because we know what to look for, regardless of if it's in the same format. And we will make sure it's translated into the Payzar module for your pre-payroll before it's sent over to a local vendor. And we, by the way, also give you an audit trail of what happened. That would, like, in my opinion, take it even a step further, that it also learns and knows what to look for, rather than just look at cell A22 for this.
Absolutely, and I think speaking from our own experience at Payzar, we're getting there as well, right? So what you describe as sort of what I would categorize as just hard-coded kind of integration, hardwired integration. We know that is very challenging in a payroll environment because things change constantly, right? That's the one thing that I think we can say about payroll. There's constantly things that you need to adjust to. Hey, there's a new pay element that got introduced, or there's a new account in your chart of accounts that you now need to reflect. So it needs to be agile, right? The solution, however the solution is designed and developed, it needs to be agile to ideally just self-adapt, right? Or if it can't entirely self-adapt, at least be very easy to flag, hey, something seems to have changed here. Draw the attention of the person that, you know, can then take action on it and adjust for it. But things like, you know, what you described, it should be able to pick up, you just throw in your salary field or your bonus field, and now it should be able to say, oh, okay, I recognize this. This is the bonus field, and I need to connect that over here to my bonus input field. You know, I think there's systems that can already do that. You know,
I think that would really help. Yeah, and Pesar, of course, we will plug and play Pesar, no worries. Yeah. Which also makes me think that maybe the old Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who once said, change is the only constant, he might have been a payroller. He might have been the first payroller in the world, who knows?
He was probably working in payroll when he kind of came to that realization, that very fundamental one, yeah.
Thanks, Marc-Oliver, for all your insights and your personal views. But to use your own words, we're going to switch gears now to a different version of the lightning round, which will probe you a little bit. And I can see you're getting anxious, which probably is right. So I'll ask you a set of 10 questions.
10, wow. We only do 3 in my lightning round. This is like a lightning marathon.
Correct. So be prepared. You can only answer yes or no.
Loosen up a little bit here to
get ready. All right, here we go. There is going to be increased M&A activity by global payroll vendors.
Yes.
Pesar is only a solution for mid-sized companies.
No, definitely not.
The world will be a better place in 3 years.
Yes.
HCM providers will step into creating local payroll modules again.
No, I don't see that happening.
I listen to Celine Dion when I really need to focus.
No. Sadly, no.
Payroll professionals are too slow in adopting new technologies.
For my personal taste, yes.
Fuel-based cars will be a thing of the past in 2030.
I just listened to the news this morning. I think the EU decided to ban fuel-based cars in 2035. So I would say yes, hopefully.
Too many companies are accepting the status quo of their global payroll modules.
Yes.
The on-demand pay is buzzing, but will never be widely adopted.
That's a good question. I don't know. Can I say I don't know, or it has to be yes or no? Oh man, it's a buzz, it's widely adopted. I would say, you know, really depends so much on the industry, but widely adopted, I would say yes.
Technology is more important in global payroll than service levels.
No.
Thank you, Marc-Oliver. That were 10 questions. Although sometimes it was hard for you to answer yes or no. You can now come back to one question to either change your answer or give us some context about why you chose your answer.
Well, I can't even remember all 10, which shows my age, but I'll go back actually to the last one because I know it was probably meant to be a bit controversial, since you know, Pesar, in my background is in technology, and I answered it as no, right? Technology is not more important.
Just for the listeners, the question was technology is more important in global payroll than service levels.
Yeah, and I would say no, technology is not more important than service levels. I know this was kind of a trick question that you asked, but I didn't fall into the trap. No, but look, I think the reality is technology is something that is meant to enable the payroll professionals to be able to provide best possible service, right? At the end of the day, the payroll profession is all about providing service, right? The end customer that we like to think of is the employee, right? The employee, while sometimes in all our conversation gets forgotten, right? Oh yeah, but there's the employee. That's the most important person in this whole process, you know? If they don't have a great payroll experience, starting with, is my paycheck right or wrong? Everything else is for nothing, right? Oh, you know, I automated all this and I saved myself tons of time. well, great, but if you're not giving a great service experience to the employee, sorry, that's not worth anything. So in my own view, I see technology as a way to allow payroll professionals to provide better service levels, better service experience, but it's not more important. At the end,
so would you say that technology is an enabler? What service level?
It's one of the enablers. So of course, I'm also not so naive to think technology is the enabler. There's many other enablers to providing great service as well, right? You need training. You need to, resource your team with the right skills and with the right professionals. So there's many different dimensions that make for a professional payroll team and for successful payroll team and successful payroll operations, and technology will be one of those components, but it's not the only one.
All right, thank you. Although I'm still a little bit disappointed you do not appreciate Celine Dion, but let me just say that my heart will go on. So I think this wraps up this wonderful episode. Thanks for being the guest on your own show. To all the listeners, I've been Max.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You might come back.
I'm honored to have been invited to share my views and my thoughts on my very personal beliefs and experiences in this fun and exciting payroll world.
Thanks for being open, and a big thanks to Pesar, you and the team for inviting me to be the co-host. I've been Max van de Klis-Busink, and to all the payroll professionals in the world, kudos to you. We see you and we value you. Thank you.
Absolutely to that. Thanks, Max. Thanks for doing this. Great show.